Want to hear something super trippy?
Yeah.
So, a couple months ago, January 26th, my dad died, and I was able to make it there to Florida, where he was in the hospital. At the time, he was in a coma and not all there. And I had about 48 hours of just sitting in his room with him.
Beautiful.
Some of which was filled with other family members and things like that. But in the moment that he actually died, which is like 2:30 a.m., I've been sitting in there for hours. I'm with my brother Andy, and I'm just meditating. I'm taking a little medicine. I'm just trying to really just be fiercely present to the whole experience and not run. But at some point I was like, the silence and the breathing, the death rattle, it was just a lot. So I'm like, I got to listen to some podcasts.
Yeah.
So I put on, I go, wow, who's really good about death? Ram Dass.
Yeah.
Right? And I don't know, I didn't have the wherewithal to like scroll for a title that seemed to fit the moment. I just kind of went to the most recent one.
Okay.
And I'm listening to a lecture between a guy named Timothy Leary and Ram Dass.
Amazing.
A conversation, they're kind of batting it back and forth. And that's what I was listening to when my dad died.
Oh, wow. Thank you for sharing that. Beautiful. Yeah, there's some, I hope it was helpful.
It was amazing.
Yeah.
I mean, it's funny because they were having kind of a light conversation. It wasn't like a big, deep, moment, but we had met, some months prior to that. And I thought, oh, that's so interesting. I can't wait to share that with Zach. I was with your dad when my dad departed the body.
And when my dad was dying, Ram Dass was such an integral part of that whole process. He wasn't there that day, but, throughout those final months, his support, his coaching, his narratives, his presence was such an integral part of, making that process sort of okay for us. I was only 22, I was looking back on it, I was so young, but, it was a really interesting thing because, Timothy really considered himself to be kind of a spiritual materialist, and when Richard Albert transitioned into Ram Dass, he, kind of thought it was a shtick, and never really got down with it. But the moment that he knew he was dying, the first person he called was Ram Dass, which told me a lot. I mean, all these years later, I'm able to look back on it and go, oh, okay. All right, Timmy, you were kind of hiding in the shadows there around your spirituality, and we're a lot more spiritual than you, pretended to be.
Right.
So it was kind of an interesting tell, I think. Yeah.
Did your dad die of cancer?
Prostate cancer, yeah.
Ah, yeah.
Prostate cancer, but I mean, he did one chemo session and said, fuck this isn't for me, and just embraced the whole death and dying process and turned his final kind of last arc of his work all around the demystification of death, and his final book was on death and dying with dignity and kind of quality of life conversations and narratives and things like that. And originally, because his website Leary.com came out in September of 95, way early, and I was part of that team, and we thought we were going to broadcast his death like on See You, See Me, a little 8-bit stop motion streaming.
Wow.
We ended up not doing that, but his website was a huge kind of thread and fabric of that whole process, which was way ahead of his time.
You're only 22.
I was only 22, yeah.
I'm assuming, Ram Dass and kind of that whole perspective on consciousness and the body and all of that must have been supportive, but how did you kind of learn how to grieve?
Not sure I did until later. I'm not sure I did until later for sure. When, Ram Dass was around throughout my whole life when I was a kid, but as I sort of became a teenager, and then during those last couple of years when my dad was sick, Ram Dass's presence like freaked me out. Like I was like, terrified me. I was like, this guy is like, what is this? This beam, this unconditional love beam and this softness. And it was like, when you're kind of that young and still finding your own identity and seeing someone just be fully in presence, it's a scary thing. And the whole,
Right, because they have the kind of ability to see what's present in you, right?
Yeah.
There's kind of no hiding when
There's-
someone has that degree of presence.
there's no hiding. And so much of like the Ram Dass thing, especially when you're with him, it's being in silence. You know, it's not filled with words. And, you know, when you're kind of young and insecure, that, you know, being in silence and just being with someone is like, it's an incredibly terrifying thing. You know, they can see all your little games and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, I mean, the grieving process, I'm not really sure I dealt with it until much later. You know, it wasn't so much him actually dying, because he really celebrated it and turned his life and his death into a celebration and prepared us for it. It wasn't sudden. That part was fine. It was more the not knowing who I was and kind of grieving sort of the process for how do I discover that? Because up until that point, I just was Timothy Leary's son.
Right.
I didn't work, man. I didn't, like, all my social circle was built in. Girls were built in. Parties were built in. It just came with it, you know? So I didn't really know I didn't know how to pay a bill. I'm not joking. Literally didn't know how to balance a checkbook.
I still don't know how to balance it.
Right, exactly.
But I get the point.
But I mean, at least we have electronic stuff.
Totally,
And then
yeah,
I was just like, you know, I didn't know how to go find an apartment and things like that, you know, so.
Register your car.
Or it just was a
get
mess.
the heat turned on.
Yeah.
You know?
And it was just a mess, searching for my own identity. And that's what got me into substance abuse, you know, running away from that grief and my own kind of self-identification, my own kind of self-inquiry process was non-existent. So substance abuse was a temporary numbing agent that, you know, sort of, I thought solved the problem. And then, you know, things got really bad. And once I got into recovery and rediscovered spirituality, and then it kind of opened up again.
Right,
Yeah.
right. And were you living in LA at the time?
Benedict Canyon.
Is that where your dad lived the
Yeah.
whole time?
Yeah.
So funny, dude. When I was looking at the notes this morning for this conversation, I remembered that I went to a party at your house.
Oh, you did?
In the early 90s.
Fantastic.
I just remember it was a big deal. I don't remember talking to your dad or if he was even around or if you were there, but it was, you know, it was one of those, I mean, I was going to Dead shows and taking a lot of psychedelics and stuff. So it's like, I don't know how I got invited, who it was, but I just remember, dude, there was a party at Timothy Leary's house. I'm like, oh shit. I don't remember what happened. I just remember it was in the Hollywood Hills-ish.
Yeah.
And
I'm sure I was there.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
funny.
Yeah.
That's about it. You know, because of the nature of those type of parties. But that's interesting, you know, to think about, I don't know, just culturally, I think many people, especially when I moved to LA in the late 80s, it was like, from the Bay Area, people viewed Los Angeles as like, you know, boob jobs and red Ferraris and just vapid, cheesy materialism and fame chasing and all of that. But there always has been, I think, a subculture of kind of psychedelic community, spiritual seekers, meditators. There's definitely like a bedrock of that there that many people, I don't know, not so much now,
God.
but back then were unaware of. So it's interesting that your dad like lived in the middle of LA, but
1000%, man. And all of those threads, that is 100% true, especially with Eastern mysticism and Eastern religions and psychedelics as well. Because, you know, like when Paramahansa Yogananda and Swami Vivekananda, who started in the Vedanta church and all that, when they came to America, they started on the East Coast, but at that point in the 20s and 30s, the East Coast was still a little bit, you know, Protestant or Catholic, a little stiff, and it was like, go west, you know, they're starting this new kind of, you know, Hollywood thing, and those religions took hold there, you know, and Yogananda and Vivekananda were able to thrive there. The Hare Krishna movement also helped really expand in Los Angeles and things like that. And psychedelics, I mean, Aldous Huxley lived and died in the Hollywood Hills. Humphrey Osmond did the first.
Really?
Yeah.
wow.
Humphrey Osmond, the guy who coined the term psychedelic, was the UCLA psychiatrist, Oz Janiger, Tim Leary, all those guys, you know, they were thriving in Los Angeles. And I think that really goes to show, you know, say what you want about Los Angeles, and I could say a lot about LA, but it always has had sort of this, and still does in some ways, sort of this thread of like reinvention. You can be anything in LA. You know, you can,
Right.
you know, you can create any sort of newfangled archetype and dream big and make it sort of, because it is symbolic of the new world. And that part of LA I really love. And I think it's like fertile soil to allow kind of ideas like that to thrive.
That's so true.
Yeah.
I definitely had created a few versions of myself there.
Yeah, right.
Some for better, some for worse.
Yeah, likewise.
Yeah. I'm going to share something super wild with you right now. Did you know that if you laid them all out, your blood vessels would stretch for 60,000 miles? It's crazy. That's a lot of distance to cover. Now, the problem is, just like any high traffic lanes, they wear down over time. Eating a crappy diet, daily stress, and lack of movement don't help matters either. So maintaining blood flow in all those arteries, veins, and capillaries as you age is crucial to keeping your brain sharp, your muscles strong, and even your skin looking vibrant. That's why I'm stoked about Calroy's new Vascular Health Bundle. Calroy's Arterisol HP and Vasconaut HP work together to rebuild what's breaking down in your circulatory system. Arterisol HP is the only supplement clinically shown to restore and protect the lining of your blood vessels, thanks to a rare seaweed extract with powerful cardiovascular benefits. And Vasconox HP delivers sustained nitric oxide so your blood vessels stay open, flexible, and ready to move oxygen where it's needed. So for real, if you want better endurance, clearer thinking, and faster recovery, the solution is simple. You need better circulation. To get it, visit calroy.com/Luke to get your best price today and pick up a 3-pack bundle and get a free canister of nitric oxide test strips so you can track your results. Because the fact is, we are only as healthy as our blood flow, so let's take care of it. That's calroy.com/Luke, calroy.com/Luke. Speaking of Aldous Huxley, when I, a few years ago, began to explore the realm of psychedelics and plant medicines as someone in recovery, I became very interested in, I don't know, just researching the history of that intersection and in a way just trying to reconcile it and see where the two would meet. And in that research, of course, I had known this, but just kind of more as a rumor. I didn't look that deeply into it. But the co-founder of AA, Bill Wilson's early use of LSD.
Yeah.
And the story is that he sat with Huxley at the vet hospital in Westwood.
In Westwood, yeah.
Do you know anything about that story, or have you vetted it, or have any details about it?
And Humphrey Osmond again. Humphrey Osmond is the one who actually, because Humphrey Osmond turned on Huxley with mescaline, which became the Doors of Perception. Humphrey Osmond is the one who started the 1950s LSD research on alcoholism. Oh. And he's the one who turned Bill on. And yeah, Huxley was around for that. But, Osmond was really the Pied Piper for both of them. And now the story, that movie, what was it called? I think it was called Bill W., the documentary about Bill, which talks a lot about the LSD use and stuff. But until that came out, there is an official piece of AA literature on some bigger meetings might have it. That book called Pass It On. It has a green cover. It's official. Yeah, you know it? Right. Yeah. But it's not at every AA meeting, and most people haven't.
You got to go to central office to the library and get it. And
now and then I
want to point out I had every book that organization ever put out. Because I'm just like, what is happening here?
Right, right. And that book is fascinating and talks a lot about Bill Wilson's LSD use. And I always used to challenge old school AA guys. I don't know, that's urban legend. And no, it's in the book, man. It's here.
Yeah.
And he had 6 experiences and
6, wow.
6, and thought it was going to be, he called it the great ego sublimator. Thought it could be a cure for alcoholism in conjunction with the research that Osmond was doing, because I think they worked with 215 alcoholics and had a 60% efficacy rate after a year.
Wow.
Yeah, 60%. And alcoholics who said they no longer after I don't know if it was, I think maybe 2 LSD sessions, and Bill thought it was going to be the next great step in recovery, but I think it was his wife who kind of pulled him from the edge of that. She was the one who was like, I don't think this is going to be a good idea. I don't think this is going to land well in the fellowship, and I think it was her who kind of
Lois,
kind of put the brakes on that a little bit. Yeah. But it's a fascinating story.
It is fascinating, and it's so counterintuitive. I think that's the thing that's so interesting about that relationship is that, like, what our recent history has shown us is that the most successful model for addiction recovery is total abstinence.
Right.
And it makes the most sense, right? But then if you look at the inception of Alcoholics Anonymous was in a sense predicated on an experience in part brought about by Bill Wilson drinking this belladonna drink
Yeah.
in Towns Hospital.
Yeah. That's right.
And I see, I thought that he had his white light experience while on that,
Yeah.
but then I looked a little deeper, and looks like it was like within a couple of days of that, then he had this famous white light experience, this transcendent experience that
Yeah.
essentially, cured his alcoholism and led to what we now know as the 12-step movement.
But that transcendent belladonna experience, even while he was on it, it did give him the download for the steps and chapter 4, how it works and all of that. Yeah, it wasn't, I think you're right. It wasn't until a couple of days later did he put it on paper.
Right.
But I think it speaks to the larger issue, though, of like, what do we consider to be intoxication, and what do we consider to be mind and mood altering, and the contexts and sort of the thought bubble in which we view that. I think the 12-step culture, because of, the expansion of the treatment industry and how that kind of fed into criminal justice reform and kind of mainstream hospitalizations and things like that, I think they just sort of by default kind of landed on that, all mind and mood altering things. But when we look at plant medicines and psychedelics, I mean, not just plant medicines, and, LSD is not a plant medicine. I think, yes.
Neither is Bufo. People always refer to, or really even like mushrooms aren't really a plant either. Anyway.
That's right, yeah. I mean, I used to talk to Ramdas about this all the time. I think having a psychedelic experience with your focus being on your recovery is kind of an embodiment of the 3rd and the 11th steps, seeking only for his knowledge of his will and the power to carry that out, and improving your conscious contact with God as we understood him, she, or it to be, and, all of those things. I mean, I can't think of a better method to establish a deeper connection with spirit, right? So, yeah, that's how I look at it, and I think as time goes on, fortunately, I do think more people in the 12-step community are becoming a little bit more malleable and a little bit more malleable and open-minded to kind of the breakdown of how that looks. And also, too, I think there's also has to be a recognition around the hypocrisy, and this is not a judgment at all, but, a huge number of people in the fellowships, they're on some kind of psychiatric medication, so how can we say, well, a doctor gave you that, that's okay, but a shaman who gives you this, that's not okay. And so I think if we kind of look at it objectively and try to reframe our cognitive bias, I think it's a different lens.
That's a really good point.
Yeah.
At one point in maybe the first year or two of my sobriety, I'm sure well-meaning psychiatrist put me on some psych meds.
Yeah, right.
I was fucking nuts, son. Oh my God. Just thinking back, oh my God, I was crazy. And then I got addicted to them.
That's right.
And I was like, wait, I know what happens when you start to feel dope sick. I mean, it's a different kind of withdrawal. But I was crazy on them. But if I ran out, I would start to lose my shit. And to the point where, like, he would leave them. He would leave like extra sample meds, how they get the little sample packs, because I would run out of the prescription. He would like leave it, under the call box at the office building, like in the bushes and stuff. It was super weird. And I was like, wait a minute, I'm supposed to be sober,
Yeah.
So yeah, that's a great point. Going back to what you said about the steps and step 11 and, improving our conscious contact with God and that part. But, in step 3, that surrender, turning your will and your life over to God, I mean, any legitimate psychedelic experience is inherently about that.
That's right. Yeah.
Right? I mean, you close your eyes and you're like, okay, I'm going somewhere. I'm not here anymore. If that's not like the ultimate kind of act of trust,
That's right.
every time you do it. Have you made other correlations between some of those teachings and psychedelic experiences?
Absolutely. I mean, no, I mean, that's a really good example, because I think, at least large doses of psychedelics, right? What's the primary thing that it requires? Surrender, right? And trust. The second you start to fight it, the second you start to resist, then you're going to be caught in the whatever the challenging trip loophole is, and you're going to struggle and you're going to push back and it's not going to work, and you're going to be writhing around on the floor for 8 hours. But when you get to that place of surrender and trust, to me, it's like, turning your will and your life over is Dharma, right? I mean, my primary spiritual method is from the East, and that to me is the embodiment of Dharma. It's going to where you can best serve the world and best serve your own path. What's in harmony? What's in equanimity? How do you spend your time and energy? Is that in harmony with your somatic experience, with your emotional intelligence, with spirit, with service? So I can't think of a better example of, I don't think psychedelics are a sustainable everyday method in and of themselves, but they are great, accelerants to help you realize, to help point out where you're out of balance, to help kind of show you where a little course correction is appropriate,
Right.
Yeah.
So like in taking a personal inventory, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there's no other inventory like
Yeah.
drinking some ayahuasca,
Right.
or I
That's
remember
right.
one mushroom journey I had. I mean, this is like, I'm 23 years sober at this point. I mean, written 1,000,004 steps. For those listening, don't know what that is. That's where you really get honest with yourself about your behavior and motives and things like that. I mean, I uncovered gross shit within myself that I had never even contemplated once. Just think like, oh God, just the ways I had treated people in the past.
And the mushroom showed you that.
Yeah.
Right.
And
Yeah.
I'm just like, holy, I don't know if I ever would have uncovered that. And also uncovered like a whole new list of people to whom I owed amends
Yeah.
too.
Right.
And then there's like, wow, talk about integration. Right. I just realized, shit, there's like 10 people I really heard and I never even knew it, or let alone acknowledged it to them.
Well, that will, for those listening who are in recovery and who aren't, I mean, I think the moral of this is that your waking state of consciousness, has a sort of limitation into what it can uncover. Yes, there are spiritual practices, meditation, breathwork, and we can go on endless lists of great spiritual practices that help soften that to a bit. But, understanding that your waking state of consciousness has limitations, has a mechanism put in place that does not allow you to see the entire sphere, does not allow you to pierce the veil. And that's intentionally designed that way because we all have to live in balance with each other in this construct of reality. We all have to sit here and agree that this is reality, right? And we all can't be poking holes in the fabric of reality, or else it would be chaos. There has to be some semblance of, but that the same thing is true for our own personal experiences too. And I think, like you said, I mean, I have never done that. And that's actually a really, it's a pretty cool story of doing a fourth step after a psychedelic experience. But
It wasn't by choice.
Yeah, it just happened to be right. Okay.
It's just, in those moments, I'm sure you're familiar, right? Where like you get kind of a hint of a direction that you might go in, right? And it's like, that's a little crunchy in there. I'm just wired. I don't like it, but I know the payoff is worth it. So I get a little crunchy. Hey, want to look at this? A little whisper, right? You want to check this out over here.
That's right.
And if it's too crunchy, I'll have to pause, maybe ask for help. Like, whoa, I'm about to go in Crunchville. Just, am I okay? You're okay. Go for it. Take a couple deep breaths, maybe take an eye mask off, just kind of recalibrate. And then like, all right, coach, I'm going in. And going in there, it's not up to you necessarily. You've given consent.
That's right.
I'm willing to explore the nature of, all the nooks and crannies of who I am and who I think I am and who I'm not and all that. And it's been in those moments where I'm just like, oh, gross.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, God, I did that. I am that.
I am that. Yeah, for me, it's the I am that. Even today, I smoked DMT a week ago, and
Really?
it's only 15 minutes long. I'm just lying in my puja room, and and I love DMT because it's so short, and then for me, it's like an e-ticket express lane. I get so much out of the 15 minutes, but it is that. It's like, oh God, I am that. I am still that. I'm still dealing with that. It's like, oh gosh, okay, let's put that into focus again. And yeah, no one here gets out alive, man. I mean, you can't hide from it. You can't hide from it, and that's both the beauty and the cautionary tale of psychedelics. You can't run, you can't hide. It's all there on the surface,
In that exploration that you've done within yourself, how much of that has, in a positive sense, led to self-love and acceptance?
Quite a bit of it. I mean, no question. It's so easy for me to, but in the kind of, we share kind of a recovery bond, so we can kind of go with that, my self-loathing, self-limiting, beating myself up, and oh my gosh, I relapsed, all these terrible things happened, and I did all these terrible things. Oh my God, it's so, I could just let those tapes run all day if I don't do something to change my state, or some kind of spiritual practice to get me to kind of go in a reparative process. But even today, the psychedelic experience really helps reframe that for me in a way that, I mean, sure, I'm not saying, you can't discover that without psychedelics, but for me, it's been just a powerful reminder that okay, you do have a lot to offer the world. Oh, wow, you went from being homeless to getting a book published. That's great. Celebrate that, man. Be proud of yourself. Most people don't make that, and just little Easter egg reminders that are there along for me in the dharmic path that I just might otherwise overlook, yeah.
I realized looking at that particular piece and just how important it is to have, I don't know, to have fulfillment in life, right?
Yeah.
To be able to appreciate yourself from a place of humility. But that's been really challenging for me. I've gone through phases of, really kind of patting myself on the back in a positive sense, like you. I mean, came from a really dark place. I mean, my life was absolutely doomed, and I've worked very hard and had a lot of grace to redeem myself and accomplish incredible things, both internally and out in the world.
Yeah.
But still, I catch myself sometimes. For example, I'll look at my wife and I'll just see her in her flawless perfection of just the fact that she's just breathing, doesn't have to do anything, doesn't have to be anything, right? It's like just the essence of her, who she is just beautiful. And I just have such appreciation and just unconditional acceptance and love for her, right?
Yeah.
And it's a beautiful thing to experience that. But sometimes I'll catch myself having that experience of her and I go, wow, I'm totally incapable of doing that for myself.
And why is that? Oh,
I don't know. That's what
that?
I wouldn't say totally incapable. I would say at times,
Sure.
it's harder to access that, probably more of the time. And then there's some peak moments or experiences where I go, oh shit.
Yeah.
I deserve what she deserves, or anyone else that I might love and appreciate in the same way,
I mean, you and I share that. There's no question about that. Those moments can be really pronounced to me, and I do. I'm just because I'm perpetually curious, I try to figure out why. And, I tend to think that, the Western kind of framework, modality, construct for living in the material world is partially to blame for that. It's, no matter how spiritually attuned or spiritually whatever on the path or advanced we think we are, we're all susceptible to the programming. I mean, the news cycle, social media, or just life in the material world. And I think that programming, it's designed to make us feel less than. It's designed to compare and contrast. It's designed to kind of illuminate what Ram Dass would call the illusion of separation, right? And that is sort of what, I think the kind of modern version of late stage capitalism is sort of kind of about, highlighting our differences, not the similarities, not the beautiful synergies and things like that. So, I mean, I look at my work and my spiritual practice as anything that I can do to chip away at the illusion of separation, right? And not constantly be in this repetitive kind of thought loop of like, oh, I'm not enough. Why can't I experience this? What, all, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera,
I think within that construct too, just the kind of the influence from the outside in, it really, I want to see if you agree with this. It seems to really push us more towards selfishness.
Yeah,
too,
absolutely.
right? Because it's like if you think, or you are in fact being judged by the outside world and kind of the manifestation of your efforts, success in an external sense, then you start striving for that, and to strive for that kind of negates service.
That's right.
Right? It just becomes all about like achieving, winning, getting my house, my car, my success, my vacation.
Then bigger house, better car.
Yeah, totally.
Exactly. Yeah.
Totally. And that's something I've noticed within myself lately. When I was much more active in recovery, I mean, there was some days, hours a day where I'm directly devoting and committing my attention and love to someone to help them, right? And for a long, long time. And there was so much fulfillment in that.
Yes.
And then life changed, and I started kind of casting a wider net and finding my Dharma and hopefully positively impacting people at large, but don't have as much of that, very little, in fact, if I'm honest, of that direct, like human to human experience where I'm really able to give of myself.
Yeah.
And that seems to be missing because I've gotten more caught up in like building a business and this and that. It's like, I'm just being honest. I think like a little too much service of the self, which also includes, my wife and our little family and things like that. But do you think there's kind of a slippery slope in that too, of just becoming, if you're success driven, how do you do so without being self-driven?
Yeah, no, it's a great point. I think there's a little bit of a slippery slope with that, even within this modern psychedelic rebirth, renaissance, whatever it is that you want to call it, in that psychedelics, as it relates to mental health, it's become inextricably linked at this point, right? So kind of the modern kind of default paradigm around psychedelic use has been healing, right? Personal healing. And that sounds great. That sounds really cool, right? And it can be very helpful and very successful. But sort of what I'm seeing, sort of the offshoot of that, is it's created this sort of paradigm of radical individualization. Like, me, how can I heal myself and create a better version of myself, right? And again, that sounds
of myself for myself.
Of myself for myself.
Yeah.
Yes, of myself for myself.
Yeah.
Without like, and this is the one thing that I think the 60s really did get right with psychedelics, is that movement was also based off of this, maybe it was naive and idealistic, but this sort of desire to create a new world and a better world for all of us. And I don't see as much of that today. I don't, like, how can I be of service? How can I be a better steward for, healthy eating and exposing people to, threats like this, or the environment and climate change, or civil rights, the sexual revolution, women's rights. All of those things were born out of the 60s and out of psychedelia. And I don't see as much of that today. I see it much more like what you just said, like, how can I heal myself for myself to be a better version of myself so I can go off and do more for myself?
Right.
And so I think we're going a little, that to me is the perils of the medicalization movement of psychedelics. There's plenty of cons we could talk about too. I mean, plenty of pros we can talk about too, of course, but those are the cons for me.
Do you think some of that has to do with the lack of cultural context in the West versus, I mean, some of these medicines, obviously, we don't even know how far back their use goes in indigenous cultures, right?
Yeah.
But it seems like, as someone kind of in the Western culture, the outside looking into what remains of some of those cultures and traditions, that because those experiences were and are so interwoven into cultures and family systems, and there's like an actual traceable lineage,
Right.
it seems like less so geared toward the individual and more toward the collective, because
right.
there's a construct there to support that. It's kind of part of the purpose of the whole thing.
Yeah.
Could you unpack kind of
100%.
anything on that?
Yeah, I mean, 100%. I mean, if you look at even today's, the remnants of indigenous cultures that use psychedelics, right? If you kind of see how it is they operate in the world, the one kind of constant that they have is equanimity with their family systems, with ancestral, intergenerational kind of connections there on their land, with the land itself, with their bodies and what they eat and how they, like what we would call nutrition in the West. And that makes the process of using psychedelics much more of a kind of an integrational experience, right? Because you fold right back into this fabric to where everybody knows. They know that you know, and you know that they know, and everybody knows. In the West, we don't have that, right? It's like, so on the most extreme example, right? Like the worst way you could use psychedelics is to do a heroic journey on Sunday and go to your office on a Monday, right?
Oh, God.
That's, sorry, it's a disaster, right? And that's the worst way you could do it. But, what our Western framework doesn't really have a support system, built into it. So, yeah, there are a lot of, there's some crunchiness and there's some stickiness around that, around how do we create better fabrics of support and trust and safety for people to kind of melt back into, their experiences. And it's tricky. I don't think any of us really have the answer for it yet, but it is, I think it's going to be the great question of the next kind of round of the psychedelic expansion. Is our society built to absorb this many people using psychedelics? I don't know. I'm not saying it does or it doesn't, but I definitely don't have the answer. I don't think anybody does.
If you're a fan of this show, you likely have some knowledge of the concept of quantum energy. We've covered it a lot over the past few years. Put simply, quantum energy is the source energy that exists in literally everything. Every one of us constantly interacts with the quantum energy fields around us. What sucks, though, is that your energy field can be greatly disrupted by environmental toxicity and chaotic energy created by EMF. Well, thankfully, the innovative folks over at Lila Quantum develop products to strengthen and protect our biofield and even mitigate harmful EMF. But let's be real here. Anyone can make claims about quantum energy products because this energy is, by its very nature, invisible and therefore difficult to prove. What can be proven, though, is whether or not a quantum energy product has a positive impact on the body. To solve this, LilaQ provides a grip of randomized, placebo-controlled single and double-blind studies proving the many benefits of their products. Of the various studies listed on their site, the dark field microscopy studies are some of the most intriguing. These studies demonstrate significant protective and improvement effects of the quantum block technology on human blood following only a 10-minute exposure. To feel the effects of quantum energy yourself, here's what you do. Go to LilaQ.com and use the code Luke10 to get 10% off your first order. That's LEELAQ, LilaQ.com. What does it look like when you're at home and you feel called to have a 20-minute DMT journey?
What is it?
I asked because I like, that sounds like a great idea, because I love the DMT space. Of all spaces, that's probably my sweet spot.
Nice.
But I think I would be scared, to just sit here, and this is kind of our ceremony room.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, honey, I'll be upstairs for a little while. I'm going to go do my thing. I feel like I would be, scared is kind of overstating it, but I feel like the interdimensional nature of those experiences are kind of scary in the sense that I don't know that I would be able to provide the protection for myself that that a more I don't know like a ceremonial experience that is created with intentionality and kind of some degree of sacredness and protection, right? Where there's like a grid being, I mean, like if you sit with a legitimate shaman, I mean, there's going to a lot of preparation goes into the space and the music and the smells. And
Of course.
there's micro rituals throughout the beginning, middle, end, after. I feel very like safe and held to where nothing that I don't want in my field is going to be allowed to be there. Whereas if I was on my own and I just was like, oh, I'm going to hit the DMT pin, I don't know that I would feel totally safe in those realms.
That is a very valid thing to put out there, but and there are some caveats and things that I would kind of clarify. One, I have me and my partner have a puja room at our home that is pretty great. It's got some pretty heavy duty vibrational stuff in there, spiritual materialism, but it's very safe and beautiful and comfortable, ornate and involved. And, my practice is pretty, based on a pretty rigid tradition and things like that. And also too, she sits for me, we sit for each other,
okay.
I don't recommend using any DMT, and certainly not Bufo 5-MeO DMT on your own, ever.
Jump over the freaking balcony.
Yeah, I mean, ever. So we sit for each other.
Okay.
And we do ceremonialize it. We do a little puja before and sing a little kirtan. I've got my harmonium and do some kind of the basics of kind of creating a container. So yeah, I just wanted for anybody listening, if you are using these things in that way, you find a way to ceremonialize it and find a trusted person to sit for you and to be with you, and to create some kind of container that doesn't feel, sort of like haphazard and rushed. So there are some caveats to it. I just want to put that out there. Yeah.
That makes sense. Yeah. That creates.
But you're welcome to come to our puja room, man. It's really a lovely experience, and I'll sit for you anytime you want, man.
Oh, I'd love that. Yeah. I think that came to mind because I did have one experience with essentially like a extended DMT few hour kind of thing, similar to ayahuasca, but a different kind of formula. And there wasn't a lot of intentionality around the container, and I felt a little bit skeeved out for like a month afterward. And I feel like, I don't know if I had an entity attached or something. It might be overstating it, but I feel like my field was a little bit infiltrated in some way that I'd never experienced before, and that kind of gave me pause. It was like in an Airbnb in downtown Austin. There wasn't a lot of that kind of the context that I was used to, and I was like, interesting. That's good to take note of.
And that is a great note for anybody considering the psychedelic experience, and for anybody who's kind of interested in why challenging experiences arise, right? 9 out of 10 times, challenging experiences, what we used to call bad trips, we've kind of changed the language. It's due to a few factors: poor setting, like you're not in the right environment at all. Poor set, you shouldn't have been doing it in the first place, and you rushed into it. Impure compounds, right? And then to a lesser degree, severe mental health issues. And again, poor set, you're not a candidate to be doing it anyway. But usually it's one of the first three things, and when you go, like a perfect example is if you go to the Zendo project at Burning Man or Lightning in a Bottle and go to the Zendo tent and see all the people in there being cared for who are having bad trips. It's because the setting, because they took too much, dosage was bad, and something went awry. I mean, these compounds, these are powerful tools, that can, the slightest thing can set you off and completely just dominate your experience, and not for the better, I mean, I have 100 examples of, not 100, that's an exaggeration, but I've got a handful of examples where that's happened in my life. Just the smallest thing set me off for 8 hours, and I can never come back from it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Reminds me in the early 90s when it wasn't the first time I worked with like acid or mushrooms, but most of those experiences were centered around Grateful Dead shows.
Mine too.
So it's like,
I started when I was
and I don't know
15.
why this I never got it through my thick skull, but an LSD trip lasts considerably longer than any concert, even the Grateful Dead, right?
That's right. Yeah.
So it's like we time the dose, so we're peaking, right when the show starts, and then you kind of forget, in 2 hours we're going to be in the parking lot tripping balls, eating like dirty grilled cheese sandwiches and trying, our ride left and like all this fucking drama. But there were so many situations I got myself into that were, to the point of being dangerous in some cases. Just, you're at the Oakland Coliseum and everyone leaves and you're laying on the ground and then you realize like, oh shit, the parking lot's empty. I don't know where my friends are. And I'm also drunk and whatever else now, right? It was like some really like gnarly situations. Because I was just totally unconscious. And I think the intentionality, maybe I was seeking some sort of transcendence, but really I think it was part of the addictive cycle of just trying to run away from unresolved trauma and things that were just torturing me.
Escapism.
Yeah, psychologically, right?
Sure.
And so it's just like, of course it's going to go off the rails because I'm not really doing it with a positive or pure intention.
That's right. Yeah.
I'm trying to use a substance to escape my reality.
Yeah.
And all that psychedelics do is enhance and magnify your
They magnify it. Yeah.
It's like the worst possible way to escape.
Yeah. No doubt. I grew up, my introduction to psychedelics was through the Grateful Dead as well. And, most of it was pretty positive, but there were certainly some instances, where it fell off the rails. Yeah.
At what point in your youth did you cross the line into addiction in terms of it being problematic?
It's an interesting question. Well, when I started smoking cannabis around, 14, 15, immediately became clear that, looking back on it now, I can see it so clearly. I was not just, have a bong hit on the weekend. It was sort of became a pretty habitual thing. And my relationship with being stoned all the time was pretty apparent. But it wasn't until my 20s did things really fall off the rails when I was introduced to harder drugs. But yeah, early on I could tell that, I had whatever it is that is, if you want to talk about how your brain is wired, if you want, trauma, unresolved trauma. My opinion is it's a multitude of things. I don't believe that it's 100% unresolved trauma. I do think that there's a little bit of hardwiring too, especially around opiates and cocaine. Like, like the way our dopamine receptors, get depleted and need more is different than other people's. In combination with unresolved trauma, it creates the addiction cycle. So
well, that's such a great point to make too, because I know a number of people who have experienced some degree of trauma in their childhood, sexual abuse, physical abuse, etc. And drugs and alcohol have never and will never help them be able to live with that, right? Or it's like someone like me, it's like the perfect recipe. Trauma, discovered drugs at 8, 9 years old, boom, like it saved my life. And I know people that, they don't get that kind of relief to, their angst from drugs and alcohol. There's just, their chemistry is not wired in a way that's receptive to that.
Yeah, I'm glad that you said that too, because I do think like sometimes in our kind of extended circle of alternative healing, transformational movements and things like that, I do think that there is, kind of like the Gabor Mate, kind of a little bit of overemphasis on that. All addiction is just unresolved trauma and grief. And I don't think that's 100% true. I think it's a large part of it, but I do think the hardwiring, like in my circle of friends growing up, and, you talked about, going to a party at the Leary house, and I'm sure I was there. And all of us, all of our extended circle, we were all partying pretty hard. And there were about 3 of us of the group who went on to have serious drug problems. The rest of them could, when the 8 ball was done, they were done. They were fine. There were 2 or 3 of us who were like, not okay. Where, and 20 years later,
there's no done.
There's no done.
If it's done, you get more.
You get more. Yeah.
Yeah.
And those 3 of us to this day are in recovery,
What was hitting bottom like for you?
God, man.
I think, and I ask this because I think of, from the outside, many people think hitting bottom is something external, right? Where it's like, losing the wife, losing the job, losing the career, losing your health.
It was all of those things.
For me, it was more of an internal experience. Yeah. So I'm curious what it looked like for you and how you might define it.
Yeah, of course, there are all the external things. And I could tell all the gruesome jails, institutions, homelessness, broke, all that stuff. I'm no different than so many other addicts, and that stuff's all fine, but it really is that, to borrow some NA literature stuff, that incomprehensible demoralization, and really being very conscious of it, that I was there, like my last, $20 again that I stole or hustled from somebody, I'm spending it, and I'm like, this is what my life has become, and this is so painful, this is so sad, this is so lonely, this is so desperate, and I don't know what the way out is, and being in that place and sort of this conscious awareness where, like, I didn't want to die. That wasn't my goal, was to die, but I also didn't, I just wanted to be sort of in kind of purgatory, in the in-between zone of society, and just being very conscious of that. And, there was a minute there where I think I fully did lose hope, where I was like, there's no way out of this. I don't know what it is, and there isn't, and I'm just going to be stuck here. And it's just sadness and loneliness and disparity. Yeah.
When you got sober the first time, did it stick for a while? Or did you struggle, getting that initial sobriety?
Yeah. So when I first got into recovery, I stayed clean 2 years, then a relapse, and I stayed clean for 9 years. So yeah, it stuck. When I first got into recovery, I was 26, I think.
Yeah, me too.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And I loved it. I loved it, man. I loved, like, the people. I loved the culture. I loved the support. Like I was telling you earlier, like, I didn't know how to pay a bill and things like that. Those people taught me how to live, basic life skills. And they were just, the support group and the family that was built in, and I took to it. I did. And also, I do admit, like, initially the language and the structure of the program did resonate with me. I also had the best sponsor in the world, and he sadly died of cancer, but he was an incredibly saintly human being, just amazing guy. To this day, I have him on my puja table, a picture of him still.
Oh, cool.
I mean, he was an extraordinary human being. So yeah, I mean, but I do understand, that I do understand why it doesn't take for everyone, why that language, why that culture, why that, sort of like low grade, I wouldn't officially call it a cult, but I'd call it low grade kind of cultism, entry level kind of, cultism doesn't stick for everyone. But I needed structure. I needed order. I needed someone to hold me accountable. I needed someone who said, you need to call me every day and tell me what's happening. I needed that.
Me too.
So, so it was all good for me. And, even to this day, I go to a meeting now and then, and I still have a tremendous fondness for the 12-step community. I know there are many in the psychedelic recovery sphere who do not, but I do. I still have a tremendous fondness for them, for it. And, yeah, I hope, that community will kind of change its views on what spiritual exploration looks like. But until they do, it's kind of not my problem,
Yeah.
I go for what works for me.
When you relapsed at 9 years,
Yeah.
what did the progression into that look like? What were some of, looking back, what were some of the signs where you began to kind of drift toward that outcome?
Yeah, that relapse was, I had my gallbladder removed, pain pills. And I remember having maybe about 4 Percocets left and sitting in the bathroom, and I was fine. I was out of pain. I could have taken Advil. And I remember sitting there going, oh, I'm actually not in pain. I'm good. I can move to Advil now, and I should flush these. And I didn't. And that was the first kind of spark. And then, yeah, the progression just became, going back to my doctor saying I needed more, et cetera, et cetera. He gave me 1 refill that ran out. Then sure enough, I was in downtown LA again, So, I mean, that one was just sort of like you're, doing everything that you were told not to do,
Right,
You know?
right. Did you ever spend any time around 6th and Alvarado in downtown LA?
All the time. Are you kidding me? The Jack in the Box?
You know Bonnie Bray?
Of course, the Jack in the Box.
Are
one.
you that
Yeah.
Jack in the Box?
Of course, man.
Oh, dude, I got it.
That was my. I lived there in the late 90s,
just
man.
east of Alvarado.
Bonnie Bray.
6th and Bonnie Bray. That's hilarious.
That's
I haven't talked to
drive
someone,
through.
dude. I haven't talked to someone. I don't know how long, decades probably, that is
Wow.
familiar with that particular location.
Yeah, and just for people, I mean, we shouldn't. Well, it's okay to say it now because it's that's been cleaned up. You can't do it anymore now. But it used to be literally like you drive through. You pull up to the parking lot, and these guys with balloons in their mouth would just spit out the balloons, and it was just crazy. It was insane. Yeah,
That's so funny. I was just writing about that particular the balloon phenomenon, and at one point, one of my drug buddies was this girl Margaret, and her parents had given her like a Mercedes, this gold Mercedes, and I didn't own a car. I mean, I was a total fuck up, and so we were using, and she would let me drive her Mercedes down to that Jack in the Box. And if I rolled up in that Mercedes, man, I was just like, you just have like a swarm of dealers like spitting their balloons into their palm, and like vying for your business. I mean, it's a funny thing for those that have never experienced that. It's really, really wild. I haven't thought about that in some time.
Yeah. And you're writing about it now?
Yeah,
Okay.
because I just happen to be writing the chapter that kind of covers that 6 years I spent in Hollywood where drugs became, really dark. And just thinking about what a different life it was. And also, when I first got sober, I worked at a restaurant called Rita Flora that was on
I know Rita Flora,
6th and La Brea.
Yeah, sure.
And I was a delivery boy.
Huh?
And so they'd send me delivering catering in the van. And sometimes I would deliver to office buildings in downtown LA. And I would be taking 6th Street, headed east. And I would pass that 6th and Bonnie Bray where the Jack in the Box is. And it was one of the first times I realized that in a very tangible sense that God had done something for me that I couldn't do for myself, because I had money in my pocket, 2 or 3 months sober. 2 or 3 months ago, I was down here like trading my last CDs for an $8 balloon of heroin, right? And now I'm like in a car and my steering wheel keeps going straight. And I was like, why am I not pulling into that Jack in the Box right now? What the fuck is happening? I'm not doing this. There's something has taken over my will, or I guess I allowed it, I offered my will to it, even though I didn't know what that really meant. And that was like one of those early wins that I really held on to. Wow, there's like, I actually have the ability to choose how the rest of this day is going to go, and whether I'm not going to end up in jail or I'm going to go back to work and get a paycheck,
And you kept going.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Never relapsed. Yeah.
Amazing. Yeah. That's great. I mean,
And it's such a demonstration of like what changed. Did I just like, pull myself up by my bootstraps and I'm not going to live like that anymore? No, maybe there was one decision. Hey, I'm going to check into treatment.
Yeah.
But after that, it was really something operating within me and through me that I had very little to do with.
I agree.
Like being
with
restored
that.
to sanity.
Being restored
right?
to sanity, yeah. And once you're kind of in that, and you have that taste of it, it's almost like it's almost like a tangible thing, like that restoration to sanity. It's almost like you can feel it and touch it, and you want to protect it. And the thought of it breaking is just, no, I'm going to keep driving. Like, yeah. But on the flip side, I also remember, kind of that, it's so funny that that intersection and that you use there too. But
I haven't bonded with someone on that in a long time, so forgive me for getting so excited, but it's just like, I don't know, it's one of those things, you had to be there.
You had to be there. But I just remember so many times where I just felt like my car was pointing itself, to that intersection.
100%.
Because it was just so accessible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No choice.
No choice.
No choice.
Yeah.
You wake up, you're sick, you're like, don't do it. I'm doing it. Boom. No. And then you're there.
No, I mean, when you're sick, it's all bets are off,
Yeah. Speaking of being restored to sanity, as we were talking a little about before, you've had a couple, if not a few, experiences of relapse in your sobriety journey. One of the ways I think about insanity re-entering into the equation of an addict is beginning to believe the idea that this time it'll be different, or that I've changed and my circumstances are improved, so therefore
sure,
I could probably experiment a bit and I'll be able to control it. Was that particular thread of insanity ever part of your experience?
Absolutely. It totally was. And I'll even take it a step further in that, there are parts of the combination of the drugs that I use, which was heroin and crack together.
Me too.
And I'll completely own it, that are favorable. Like creatively, I'm a bass player. Like I could literally sit down with a pile of drugs and play my bass for like 8 hours nonstop till my fingers are raw, and I'm like, and this is the phenomenon. This is, Jerry Garcia, Jimmy Page. That's why there's a window when it does work, and it does till it doesn't, and of course everybody falls apart. And for me, that was part of the insanity as well, was like, okay, I'm going to, the beneficial parts of this, I know I can just isolate that.
Isolate the benefits.
Yeah, isolate the benefits.
That's great.
And, and that, I mean, the 3 times I've relapsed, that lasted, 10 days or something, And then sure enough, no money or success or spiritual advancement in the world will protect you from what's to come, so.
In the time you've been sober, how have psychedelics supported your recovery?
By showing me that I'm worth saving, I'm worth caring for, I'm worth extending some self-love towards myself, that I do have something to offer the world, that my voice is valuable too, that I'm good at what I do and I should embrace that and not stay small. Reinforcing kind of these kind of just basic, fundamental kind of pillars of self-inquiry on the positive parts of why I'm here, and so many of the reasons why I got into drugs in the first place were about running from that, was about staying small, feeling that I didn't have my own voice, that, my association with my father would just always dominate that conversation, and that, that's all I was, and that narrative was really hard to break, so kind of things like that, so, even today, when now and then someone on social media, like, I'll get involved in some conversation on something, someone will just kind of try to slay some kind of, oh, you're just a Nepo baby kind of thing. And to me, it's just like, yeah, been there, done that. I get it,
You're like, I've already done that to myself enough.
Done that to myself. I get it. Try harder, please.
Well, it's funny because when I was preparing for this conversation, have so many curiosities around, I don't know, your upbringing and your dad and Ram Dass. And I have some in my notes, and if we can, and we'll go into a little bit of that, but I thought, I'm more interested in just learning who you are. I really enjoyed our brief conversation when we met, and we both spoke at an event, and I really loved your talk. And I was like, wow, I want to get to know that guy more. I could have given two shits who your family was. It's like, it's about you.
Yeah.
But that said, it is, of course, interesting when you kind of, are aware of, it's like if, like a famous musician's son or something, that's like, they don't want to be in the shadow of their famous dad forever, but you can't help but kind of be curious. Hey, what was Jimi Hendrix like, or whatever?
And it's fine. It's their karma. It's my karma, and I'm fine with it now.
Yeah.
Now I'm happy to talk about it. It's great. I'm proud of it, and those years when Timothy was alive were fantastic. They were amazing, and all the time I got to spend with Ram Dass, I cherish every second of it now. And yeah, I'm incredibly proud of it now, and I'm happy to reflect on it, and yeah.
But it sounds like an important part of your process of maturation and healing was actually just your own sense of value and self-worth, unattached to any of where you came from.
Absolutely, and that was essential in it. And at first I overcorrected and thought like, oh, okay, I should work in some sort of field that has nothing to do with any of it. So I went into advertising and marketing, and I was reasonably successful at it, and at one point pretty successful at it, and I kind of overcorrected to the point of like one day waking up spiritually bankrupt, going, oh gosh, what did I do? How did I end up here? This isn't right. This doesn't feel right. And I went to go visit Ram Dass, and all these chips started to fall back into place, and hadn't seen him in like 5 years, and it was an extraordinary visit. It was like seeing him again for the first time. And yeah, and now I look at it as like a combination of these experiences. Like I do, as sort of maybe self-aggrandizing as it sounds, I do consider myself to be a bit of a lineage holder, especially since I do work in the psychedelic field, like professionally. However, I also consider, I don't think a lineage holder can be a lineage holder without having their own karmic and intellectual fabrics to work with. And, I'm proud of that. I think I do have my own voice, and I've taken, the best parts of both of them and put it into a blender, and it's sort of like, that's who I am,
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
All right, family, it is time for a gut check. Do you ever find yourself feeling bloated and sluggish after a big meal? How about craving snacks and sugar within a couple hours of eating? I get it, man. The struggle is real, and you are not alone. Now, back in the day, I used to think taking Tums and other antacids was the way to go, especially after eating something I probably shouldn't have. And while they did help my indigestion and heartburn, I'd still find myself raiding the fridge later that night, wondering how the hell I got there. But switching gears to Just Thrive digestive bitters changed the game for me forever. Instead of masking symptoms by slowing digestion down, the 12 clinically proven herbs in Just Thrive bitters actually support stomach acid and bile flow. That means you actually digest your food better and keep your blood sugar balanced. And since taking these bitters, my post-meal cravings have vanished, poof, like gone. It's really cool. And that's because they support the production of GLP-1, the hormone that tells your brain you're full and helps you feel satisfied longer. Sounds pretty cool, right? Well, if you want to check it out, here's what you do. Go to justthrivehealth.com, punch in the code Luke20, and you will save 20% off your order. And here's a little bonus feature for you. Just Thrive bitters also support a healthy gut barrier and promote balanced gut microbiome. So hit up justthrivehealth.com and use the code Luke20. For those listening, I think have taken for granted that everyone listening is going to know who Timothy Leary and Ram Dass are.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, wait a minute, Luke. Maybe someone just tuned into this podcast for the first time and they're like, who are you talking about? Would you give us kind of the, truncated version of who your dad was and his relationship to Ram Dass and the cultural significance of their joint effort to bring psychedelics into the mainstream.
Yeah,
Whether that's what they meant to do or not.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And to tell the story, so everyone listening, Ram Dass, before he became Ram Dass, was Richard Alpert. And Timothy Leary and Richard Alpert were professors at Harvard University starting in 1960. Timothy Leary was the senior of the department. Ram Dass was a little younger than him. And they were tenured professors at Harvard University in the psychology department.
It's hard to imagine that.
I know.
You know?
It's
so funny.
It's completely wild. And they started getting turned on to some of the psychedelic research that was being done in the 50s. Again, Humphrey Osmond and R. Gordon Wasson, who went down to meet Marina Sabina and the mushroom experiences. And they got curious. In 1961, they went to Cuernavaca and had their first mushroom experience, both of them together. And Timothy famously said, I learned more in these 4 hours than I had in the previous 15 years of doing psychotherapy, and it just, set off. It was just, a spark that lit a fire inside of them around curiosity, human potential, and using psychedelics. Back then, you have to understand that, psychedelics in that context were kind of a rebuttal to psychotherapy and psychology as it had been practiced up until that point, which was still pretty linear, it's not like it is today. And so they saw it as an adjunct. So they were going about their work at Harvard, and from 1961 to 63, by the end of 63, things were getting a little outrageous. And grad students were doing it with them. And they got fired from Harvard.
Were they both fired at the same time?
No, it was actually Richard Alpert, Ram Dass, who was fired. Timothy was not, actually. Okay. Popular to, popular opinion and belief. He quit because what really happened was Richard Alpert was... he was gay, he was homosexual, and he was having a relationship with a grad student who was also doing psychedelics with him. And they were ratted out and put the whole kind of department up in flames, and Timothy went with him because they were gonna fire him anyway. They hadn't, but they were going to anyway eventually. Right after that, a woman named Peggy Hitchcock, who was part of the Mellon Hitchcock family, very affluent, old money East Coast family, gifted them the use of the Millbrook estate in upstate New York, where they could go continue their research. So they went to Millbrook, and from 63 through 67, they were headquartered there, but continuing their psychedelic work along with, what Ken Kesey was doing with the Merry Pranksters and all of that. And what everybody kind of needs to understand is the 1960s as we know it didn't really begin until 64, 65, Kennedy being assassinated, the Beatles coming to America, the Vietnam War and things like that. And it was just this perfect kind of tsunami of cultural, spiritual change that just all happened at once. And psychedelics, and then, they certainly weren't shy about professing the belief of the power of the psychedelic experience. They wrote a seminal book called The Psychedelic Experience, published in 1963, which is the first kind of how-to book for how to use them. So they kind of became synonymous with the counterculture movement because, they were both older than the kids of the time. So the kids could look and say, hey, Mom and Dad, these Harvard professors say this is okay.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. I never thought about that.
Especially Timothy, because he was significant. He was born in 1920, so he was 45 at the time. And look, of course, Timothy embraced it. And he was like, he had fun with it. He had fun with the archetype of being sort of the Pied Piper. But then, the counterculture movement grew really quickly, and Timothy really got, persecuted by the Nixon administration for being a danger to the American youth. He called him the most dangerous man in America and was trying to find a way to bust him for something. And then eventually, to make a very long story short, they planted weed on him at the border of Mexico or threw him in prison, et cetera, et cetera. He went to prison, escaped, all this. But then...
He escaped, really?
Yeah, he escaped.
I didn't know that.
Mm-hmm. He escaped from prison with the help of the Weatherman Underground, and then was smuggled to Algeria and Switzerland, where he was given political asylum, then captured by the CIA, and then did a little bit more time. And then Jerry Brown pardoned him in California.
Wow. I did not know that.
Yeah, successfully escaped from prison, man.
Holy shit.
Yeah.
That's a great story.
Oh, it's wild. And if anyone wants to read it, the play-by-play is in his autobiography, Flashbacks. But at the same time, in 1967, Timothy was really, he was an intellectual first. He was not a heart-led spiritualist. You know, he was an intellectual, the power of the mind, spiritual materialism, and he was really going off in some really brilliant but very heady directions around the use of psychedelics. Richard Alpert, on the other hand, was getting very frustrated with the notion that the psychedelic experience is based off of the idea that you must come down. And to him, he felt that was an irreconcilable failure. This is not a sustainable method. You have to come down. And there's no way that you can keep doing this and have these insights because you have to come back to whatever this is. Then he went to India and met a man who never came down, you know, and became Ram Dass and did not stop using psychedelics, but with the addition of this newfound way of having a map of consciousness and looking at spiritual practices and helping to bring yogic philosophy and meditation and mindfulness to the West, it just became this perfect kind of blend of, you know, traditional bhakti yoga mixed with psychedelic mysticism kind of fabric, you know, and both of them had this impact that lasted for generation, you know, the rest of their lives.
And beyond.
Yeah, and beyond.
We're sitting here right now.
We're sitting here
talking
right
about
now.
him.
Yeah, we're sitting and talking about it. And, you know, Ram Dass did live a good, long, healthy life. You know, he died just 5 years ago, you know, had lived till 87, had a good life, and was really able to extend his teachings for an incredibly long time. And it was such a gift.
What was it like to take mushrooms with Ram Dass?
Yeah, so, you know, he had a stroke in 97, very bad, you know, his whole left side was paralyzed. And then he spent the rest of his life in a wheelchair and needed a lot of assistance and full-time care, and managed to have that because of who he was and things like that. But I think it was either 2012 or 2013, I was out visiting him in Maui, and his primary caretaker, who's a lovely woman, beautiful, beautiful woman, but she was not, anytime he would think about taking mushrooms, she would know it's not good for you. You have got to stay healthy around that. But she was away. She went to go visit her family.
Ah.
Yeah, and so he still had another caretaker there, but Ram Dass, like, yeah, now's the time. Let's do it. And we just each of us ate a couple grams, and it wasn't the first time, but it was the first time in 20 years that we ever experienced that together. And I don't know if it was his last psychedelic experience, but it might have been. Oh man, but I look back on that as just one of those things, like it's almost like watching the movie of myself. Like, I know it was me, I know it was there, but wow, that was just extraordinary. Oh man, we just had so much fun. He had this beautiful property on Maui, and we're just looking at the flowers and the sun, and I wanted to talk about Maharaji in India, and he just wanted to talk about Timothy. And so it was like this ping pong ball thing. I'm like, no, I want to talk about Maharaji, and he just wanted to talk about Timothy. And we just, because he had this great love for Timothy. Timothy was really his first, his first kind of teacher, So yeah, we just had an incredible experience. I'm incredibly proud of it. And it was just so beautiful. And I think earlier in our conversation, we were talking about, so much of being with Ram Dass, especially towards the end, was being in silence. His aphasia really was pretty severe, so his speech was pretty slow to begin with. So a lot of your time with him was just being, and just that beautiful gaze that he would give. And when you're on mushrooms and just being in that space, it's just it's this like this plane of existence that is incredibly special, really beautiful.
It seems to me that he eventually found a way to not come down too. Would you agree?
I would agree.
But yet at the same time, I think one thing that's super cool about Ram Dass is, unlike some spiritual teachers and mystics, and maybe they just transcend it and so they don't need to acknowledge it, but he seemed to always be very upfront with his humanity. Like, I love that he would talk about he still bites his nails and has neurotic thoughts and shames himself for sexual fantasies. We know, just the human part of him was always really grounded and present, which to me makes that type of teaching less aspirational, right? It's like, oh, you know, he's made it this far. Maybe he doesn't come down, but he still is in a body and still has, you know, enough degree of ego to create self-consciousness or self-doubt.
And most importantly, never in denial about it. That's the key to it. Like, there's a great lecture, a famous kind of portion of a lecture of Ram Dass, which you can find on YouTube, about going to the porno theater in New York City in the 70s, you know, when he was in full white robe, white beard mode. And there
oh, that's hilarious. Oh my God.
And there he was at the porn theater and just wrestling with the whole.
That's funny.
Yeah. And he was so, you know, he was very direct and very honest. And that's what made him relatable. It's like, you know, and he would, you know, always say, no phony holy, you know, don't ever do that. You have to be human and show that this incarnation, you know, you're not going to transcend your humanity, especially if you make a decision to live in the West, in the material world. You know, he was not a renunciate. He did not make a decision to sustain a temple in India. And so, yeah, that's the joy of Ram Dass's teachings, is that he's every one of us. He struggles with sex, food, drugs, money, all of it. But if you're able to talk about it and flip it back as your work and your teaching and the work that you have to do, I think it makes the teachings become much more profound. Because, right, what is at the heart of, you know, if people have an aversion to the guru system, which a lot of people do and do for a good reason, right? Because so many of modern gurus are corrupt. Financial improprieties, they're sleeping with your wife, they'll steal your money. They do not do what they say, you know, and they lie about it. And that was not him, you know, and I think that's the great lesson with Ram Dass.
Yeah, it lets us off the hook too.
Yeah, lets you off the hook, right?
I mean,
yes,
it's easy to
absolutely,
get drawn into perfectionism, right? When you're on the path. I mean, I've struggled with that at different times. I go, God, I can't believe I'm still working on this one fucking thing. It's like, what's wrong with me? I'm never going to get it. And it's difficult to acknowledge you are getting it. And those neurotic habits, behaviors, attachments, part of getting it is just to accept that it's part of who you are. You
That's
know
right.
what I mean? It's like, I was telling you like how addicted to nicotine I am. And it's like, there's a spiritual perfectionist in me that's like, nah, you haven't made it because you're still habituated to something outside of yourself to help you feel more grounded or comfortable. You've not been able to summon the resources within yourself to be who you want to be and feel how you want to feel without that thing. And therefore, like, there goes the club of self-flagellation, right? And it's like, well, what if I do need something, or I believe I do? What's wrong with that? You know, and that's kind of that Ram Dass, like, hey, none of us are getting out of here with complete perfection because we're human beings.
And it's also a fallacy of adopting spiritual practices, especially Eastern ones. This whole idea of enlightenment, you know, like that. And Jack Kornfield talks about this a lot, which I love. You know, the whole idea about enlightenment in the West is, first of all, it's mistranslated, you know, and second of all, it's an aspirational high that you're never going to reach. You know, very, very, very few people are able to reach that space of complete unattachment to the material world. you know.
So few that
So
we
few.
hold them on a pedestal and they're famous for centuries.
Yeah, exactly. It's literally that few,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
You know, the Christ,
If it was
the Buddha,
common,
right?
they wouldn't be unique or
Yeah.
special, right?
And
There wouldn't be whole organizations and religions built around them or their teachings, because it's just like your next door neighbor's one. Yeah, the guy down the street, my mechanic, he's enlightened, you know?
exactly. So the idea that you are going to achieve that, and if you don't, that you've somehow fallen off the path, that's a fallacy, you know. Just do the best you can, you know, and yeah, I mean, right now I'm currently addicted to nicotine as well, and I mean, I learned to make friends with it, you know. Is it ideal? Is it my optimal state of where I want to be? No, it's not, but it's where I'm at right now, and I've made friends with it, and yeah, it is what it is, you know, man. And it's like, yeah, so. And I think, again, that really it's part of the problem, like we were talking about psychedelics in the West earlier. It's sort of part of the rub with bringing Eastern practices into the West, is that, you know, we're kind of a competitive culture and a perfectionist culture, you know, here. I think we're, you know, it's kind of like the A-type American way, and it doesn't have to be like that, you know. If you soften it a little bit, hey, it's all good.
That
You know?
mindset is counterproductive, I think, in spiritual pursuit.
That's right.
Right?
I
It kind of
agree.
works against us. It's
Yeah.
like there's been moments here and there, probably most of them in some sort of plant medicine or psychedelic experience, where I've had the sense like, I'm actually okay. Where I am, who I am is just right.
Yeah, man.
Like to letting go of that striving, you know, the standards to which we hold ourselves. Not that we shouldn't hold ourselves to some sort of moral standard, et cetera, right?
And to want to do better.
Yeah, and to, you know,
Sure.
continue on that refinement. But going back to, you know, one of the beautiful principles in the 12 steps, progress, not perfection, right?
That's right.
Having the humility to know we're never going to achieve perfection. That doesn't mean we don't try. We're not attached to the end result of arriving there, right? It's just like, oh, let's enjoy the process of steady refinement.
And I think, you know, I mean, you have thousands and thousands of people who will listen to this podcast, I'm sure, you know, and I think the fact that you get to share that the imperfections of the journey with your audience is much more of a win. It's much more, I think, of a stronghold than it is of trying to pretend that, you know, you're something you're not. And yeah, I think that's part of, you know, what makes what you do really attractive for people, and makes also, I think, much more accessible. I think for people who are newer to spiritual growth and wellness and optimization and self-inquiry and all of these things, I think that's a very intimidating path, I think, for some. I seem to observe that anyway.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
oh my God, where do I start? Holy shit. I'm 40 years old and I'm so much baggage. I'm filling up the airplane. It's like, where do you start? You
Yeah.
know, so.
Light showers that are able to do so with authenticity, I think, are important.
I agree.
You know, tell me about your book, man. I got the
Oh, yeah.
PDF, you know, a couple hours ago, and I'm like,
I should have sent it earlier. Sorry.
Yeah, I didn't
it's all right.
know that it wasn't out in hard copy. So I
Yeah.
was like, oh, I hope he can bring a book, because I love the overall premise of it, but admittedly didn't have time today to go in and speed read it. So
That's okay. Yeah.
give us the breakdown on that.
Yeah, so it comes out April 29th. It's called Your Extraordinary Mind, Psychedelics in the 21st Century and How to Use Them. And I'm glad that you asked me at the end of this than the beginning, because I think a lot of what we've talked about is encapsulated in that. It's 25% personal stories. You know, I'm not tone deaf to the idea that some people want to hear some of those stories, so I share some of them. It's 25% prescriptive, how to use psychedelics wisely, to the point of, like, I have my preparation guide workbooks in there and my integration workbooks in there that I use with clients on a regular basis. I have substance-specific question sets if you're dealing with specific substance, what to look for and how to prepare yourself for them. So there's kind of some participatory fabrics to it. And then I think the rest is sort of commentary on the last 60 years of the psychedelic movement. from the 50s until now, with a lot of emphasis being on the now, seeing some of the trends that we're see happening in today's psychedelic movement, some for the better, some that I think we should all be talking about that aren't necessarily as rosy as people think they are. And all of that with the commonality of the thread that, my main, I guess, passion in this movement is keeping the magic and the mysticism alive, right? I mean, that sounds sort of easy and simple, but to me, that is what I'm out there striving for every day. I think with the rise of the medicalized movement, we see a lot of sterility being injected into the psychedelic experience. Cold office buildings and therapists and doctors and this overly regulated, data-driven kind of framework behind using psychedelics. And I don't think it needs to be like that. So I try to keep some of that alive in there.
Beautiful.
So that's the thumbnail. That's the elevator pitch, man.
Awesome. Yeah, I can't wait to read it.
Thank you. Yeah.
Check this out. With everything that's going on with our food, air, and water, detoxing is no longer optional. And if you really want vitality, it's an absolute must. One of the best ways to remove toxins from the body is through sweating. But did you know that not all sweat is created equal? When you hop into an infrared sauna, the light is absorbed deeply by the body, causing your cells to vibrate. And that raises core temperature and enhances natural metabolic processes, pulling out nasty toxins like aluminum, cadmium, and even mercury. The sauna I use on the reg is my Amplify full spectrum sauna from Sunlighten. Sunlighten's patented and science-backed technology provides the most effective, high-quality, near, mid, and far infrared available. They actually have 4 different sauna collections, each of which features different combinations of light and varying aesthetics to fit both your needs and your decor. And with any Sunlighten sauna, you can rest assured that you're going to sweat fast, sweat deep, and support your detox. And by the way, you can learn what makes Sunlighten my top pick on the Lifestylist podcast, episode 477, so make sure to check that out if you want the deep dive. And then when you're ready to treat yourself to the world's best infrared sauna, visit get.sunlighten.com/LukeStorey and use the code LukeStorey to save up to $600. You can also find that link in the show notes on your podcast app. And obviously, it would make 0 sense to detox while exposing yourself to high levels of EMF. And that's why Sunlighten designed their heating panels to produce almost none, so you can relax and detox safely. Again, that link is get.sunlighten.com/LukeStorey, and the code is LukeStorey. Well, I'm pumped to dig into your book. That's
Thanks,
all
man.
I know.
Thank you.
I mean,
excited.
you have like such a breadth of experience subjectively in your own life, but also I think a really unique perspective in terms of the timeline of psychedelics entering the mainstream culture that we now know it to be, which is really cool. So one thing I want to ask you before we split on that note, and I have a feeling you probably cover some of this in your book, is the evolution of psychedelic experiences over the course of many years, right? And how those can kind of change in terms of the intensity of the experience or what we perceive to be getting out of the experience, our expectations, getting attached to maybe peak experiences of the past, which were revelatory, transformative, healing, etc. Kind of like the non-linear aspect of long-term use.
Yeah, wow, that's a great question.
Which is a whole other podcast.
That's a whole other podcast. Yeah, right. It's a whole other podcast. I think, if you come into psychedelics for very, say, big reasons, deep trauma, deep suffering, deep depression, addiction, whatever it is, and if you find success through the method and you have some breakthroughs, there's no question that those will change your life, right? But if you keep doing it thinking that you are going to keep having those levels of breakthroughs that you did early on, I think most likely you will be a little disappointed, because I don't think it's I wouldn't call it a law of diminishing returns. I just would call it sort of the phenomena of familiarity, sort of there's a million metaphors that we can use, sort of one that I like to use is like, I go to India a lot, right? Or I have been to India a lot. It's been a minute since I've been, but I've spent a lot of time there. And, my first couple trips there, oh my God, mind-blowing, just earth-shattering, and such a different culture and way of life. And you go back and you're kind of used to it, and hey, it's cool. And then you keep going back and it's just like, okay, I'm here again. And you're just kind of in harmony, in flow with it. But the level of profound sort of, earth-shattering, shifts in your worldview are kind of lessened. And I think that's sort of what, I'm not saying the psychedelic experience isn't worth going back to, but I think if you keep expecting breakthrough after breakthrough after breakthrough, you're going to eventually be disappointed. And that's why I always go back to the Ram Dass kind of case study and method of using psychedelics, even as you continue to use them, because then it no longer becomes like this chase for like, breakthrough or enlightenment or earth-shattering, ancestral, wake-up calls or whatever it is.
Visits from the entities.
Visits from the entities. I think it just becomes sort of like this really cool place to hang out in, where you can continue to sort of maybe refine some spiritual connections and just pierce the veil a little bit. But I think for people who are new, who are listening to psychedelics, I think it's a really good indication of where psychedelics fit into the sphere of a methodology, like meditation, breath work, whatever, float tanks, those are kind of day-to-day methods that we can continue to use to stay in harmony. I don't think psychedelics are that necessarily. I don't think it's a method in and of itself. I think it's a tool to revisit now and then. But to look at it as a method, a singular method, I think is where things get fuzzy, and might lead to disappointment.
That's a great distinction. And
Yeah.
that has been my experience over the past couple of years too.
Yeah.
Just not judging it, but just I definitely have an awareness that those big hits, those big insights, the life-changing, transformative realizations or deep healing have seemed to have kind of plateaued to the point where in the past few experiences, while some of them have been pleasant, some of them somewhat challenging, I've definitely been in the medicine space going like, hello, like, nothing's happening. And then I observe like the attachment to
Something needing to happen.
Right? And I go, God damn it, that's the lesson.
That's the lesson.
Last time I sat with ayahuasca, quote unquote, nothing happened except just profound nausea. And I'm just waiting and waiting and waiting, and nothing happened except just feeling sicker and sicker. And as I kind of integrated that experience, one of, if not the main things that I was being shown was my expectations, and that I'm trying to control something that is completely beyond any realm of control.
That's right.
There's no directing the experience. All there is surrender, and whatever shows up seems to be whatever is meant for me or the person doing it.
That's right. That's absolutely right. And I do think that also speaks, though, to, if you've discovered psychedelics and you're made it sort of work into your life in whichever way works for you. I think if you take a little bit of a break and revisit it, and I think that really fits well into how, indigenous cultures like in ayahuasca, right? They believe, they call it grandmother Aya, that these plants have disembodied teachers that are actually in the medicine. And I think if you take a break from it and then go back, I think the teachers kind of make themselves apparent in a way that maybe you weren't really thinking that they were going to make themselves visible,
Yeah.
And that might be as simple as like, oh, hey, being in nothingness, looking at your ego, or just spending 8 hours looking at sacred geometry. And what's the lesson in that? Some may say, well, that just sounds like, doesn't sound like anything to me. But I do think that, especially for those of us in the West, the act of sitting and doing nothing for an extended period of time, it's really, really difficult. And I think there's tremendous value in using any tool at your disposal to sit and do nothing. I don't mean sit and do nothing and watch television. I mean sit in just presence.
Yeah.
Because it's really hard to do.
I think that's one distinction there in that space, like in the psychedelic space, is coming to appreciate the context of an experience,
Yeah.
which could be spacious or it could be chock full. But because sometimes early on, the content of the experience within the broader context is so mind-blowing and otherworldly that it's really easy to get attached to that as a construct and expectation.
Yeah.
Right. And
That's
then
right.
maybe as time goes on, I think this is my experience as I'm trying to articulate and understand it, is learning how to have an appreciation for the field as a whole rather than what takes place within the field.
Yeah. Just observing the field and seeing how it operates under a completely different, set of laws and gravity. It seems like gravity and sound and colors and shapes and thoughts, and how your emotions just cascade into other, almost like synesthesia-like forms of being, I think is, that's something in and of itself, right? But again, just to like reiterate the point, I do think that the modern psychedelic movement has maybe gone a little bit too far on sort of the seriousness and intensity around the need to make everything this highly intentional, profound, trauma-delic breakthrough thing. And that is a really interesting kind of place to play for people who are new, who are needing some deep healing. But I think for the rest of us, I think softening that a little bit might be a good idea. Like I was saying when we weren't rolling tape, I revisited the Grateful Dead on Psychedelics for the first time in such a long time, somewhat recently. And it was just earth-shattering.
I got to do that.
It was so amazing.
I'm so glad you mentioned that, because I would have never thought of that, because that is in the realm of like my former life as an addict.
Right.
And how I related to psychedelic drugs, specifically around that music and that subculture. And so when I quit doing all drugs, I kind of relegated the Grateful Dead music experience married to psychedelics, and I threw the baby out with the bathwater, right?
There's the lesson,
Yeah.
right? And like the music, I'm kind of a Grateful Dead zealot, but the music is still an extraordinary kind of modern American musical experiment, and I think it's an incredibly rich tapestry to get back into. I was like, oh my God, this is just, wow, this was my original seed when I was 18 years old and exploring this. And I had forgotten, and I had let sort of the modern seriousness of this new psychedelic movement kind of take hold of me. And it's okay to soften up a little bit. And
right, because inherent to the movement, I think one of its kind of imperfections or faults is this judgment against like recreational use of psychedelics, right? Like, even as someone who I consider myself to be sober in my own definition of it,
as do I, yeah.
I have like an aversion to the idea of like getting high just for fun. Like there's something wrong with that, because prior, when I thought I was doing that, what I was really doing was slowly killing myself, right?
Yeah, right.
But I have had a couple experiences with psychedelics where, I don't know, going on a hike in a beautiful place and, take a gram of mushrooms, and like, I'm not out there like praying or having a ceremony. I'm just having fun and hugging trees and watching the birds and thinking maybe they're talking to me, and maybe they are, and just kind of like integrating with nature and having a fun experience that is, I guess, in the truest sense, recreational, in that I'm recreating some lost relationship to nature or to myself, or just to actually having some fun and loosening up and letting go and being liberated for a moment.
And the big difference between that, I think, and sort of this definition around having fun, recreational use, in my eyes anyway, and hearing you, the way you describe it, is the absence of ego. So like if we, use heroin or crack, those of us who are addicts like that, right? What does that primarily do? It fuels the ego, right, to a sense of just disaster, right? And that is not really fun, But like when you're out there and you're connecting with nature, that is void of the ego, and that's just trying to be in harmony and having a new kind of, I don't know, not a newfound appreciation, but maybe just a gentle reminder that like, oh wow, being with a tree, that's a pretty cool thing. You know,
Yeah,
it's a pretty
totally.
neat thing.
Totally.
Yeah.
Well, I love it. I'm glad we made that distinction. I got one question for you before I let you out of here.
Yeah.
Before I do, thank you so much, man. I'm so glad we connected. I've really been looking forward to this conversation.
My pleasure, man.
And,
Thank you.
you know, as I've said many times, we have so much in common, but I just love your energy, your perspective, your life path. I love what you're about. I'm so excited to share you and your wisdom and your essence with the audience. It's just super cool.
Thank you, man.
I mean, I love a lot of people that I sit and talk to, but some more than others. And I've
Likewise.
really enjoyed getting to know you, and I hope we can spend some more time together too,
Likewise, man.
outside of, you know, lights and cameras and things.
Yeah.
Last question is this: who have been 3 teachers or teachings in general that have most impacted your life?
Let's see. Oh my God, just 3. Well, Ram Dass goes without saying. Ram Dass has been, you know, my primary mentor and teacher both, and I'm very honored and grateful that I got to spend so much time with him in his body and together personally. There's no question on that. And with that comes Neem Karoli Baba and that, but those are one of the same. Who else would I say? I'd say Aldous Huxley is right up there as being one, because I think he was one of the first to really kind of teeter on the edge between kind of traditional, almost Victorian like academia principles and kind of shake it up and kind of add kind of an air of mysticism that, along with like Alan Watts and guys like that, and that really kind of took those models and put it in the little shaker, you know. I think it's really, really important. And oh my God, there's just so many, man. And I will say, you know, because I am a musician, you know, I won't say Jerry Garcia, but I will say it's sort of the alchemic sonic experience that was the Grateful Dead, you know. I think, you know, even all these years later, you know, what they did to American music and how they, you know, turned it on its head and showed the world that it can be this imperfect kind of quest for sorcery and magic is still a great teaching. I mean, there's a million other Indian saints and modern philosophers, from Ramana Maharshi to Alan Watts to Joseph Campbell to, you know, and everywhere in between, you know. But
Did you happen to be at the Chinese New Year's Dead show at the Oakland Coliseum, like in 93, 4, 5?
I was there at every one of those from like 90 through
Oh, because it would
94.
happen every year. Okay,
in February,
right.
yeah.
I got to look at
Yeah.
my concert stub and
Yeah.
see which one it was. I just remember being up in the nosebleeds when they had the big, the people on stilts.
Yeah, yeah.
Right? I don't know what it's called, but just being tripping balls on acid up there so high, and then watching these giants dance and walk around. I'll never forget that as one of the most impactful, you know, peak recreational psychedelic experiences. Yeah, and I think it was shortly after that Bill Graham died. It was right around that time.
Okay, so Bill Graham died in 91.
Okay, so that
Yeah.
would be early then.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think it was around
'Cause
that.
the Halloween 91 Grateful Dead concerts were the Bill Graham memorial shows where he had just
Okay.
died.
I got to go
Yeah.
look at my stubs.
Yeah.
As all things during that era, could have been
fuzzy.
one year or
Could
the
have-
other.
right.
Yeah.
I agree.
It was somewhere between, you know, 1990 and when Jerry died.
Yeah.
There was a lot of activity in it. Well, thank you so much again, man.
Thank you, man. And
can't
to be
wait do it
continued.
again.
Yeah, you're going to come on my show soon. So
I can't wait.
yeah, thank you, man.
Yep.
It's a pleasure.